Welcome everybody to the workshop today on managing exam stress. I'm Zoe Buckle. I'm an assistant psychologist working in the psychology in schools team as part of the Norfolk Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
I'm Dr. Beth Mosley. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and one of the leads for the psychology in schools team.
Lovely. So we're going to be delivering a workshop to you today on supporting your young person with managing exam stress. And just before we get into the workshop today, we've got a few kind of bits and bobs to highlight to you. We wanted to acknowledge our parent carer workshop series on childhood neurodivergence. So this particular workshop is kind of more general advice and guidance. But if you're interested in more information about neurodiversity, then we also do a childhood neurodiversity workshop series. Now, we don't currently have a workshop on supporting exam stress in neurodivergent children, unfortunately, but we do have a workshop on supporting neurodivergent children in education, which does speak a little bit about exam stress and also thinks about kind of reasonable adjustments for children with special educational needs. So if you're interested in having a little bit more of a look at that childhood neurodiversity series, you can do so when you get the slides sent through to you at the end of this workshop. And it would be helpful to know at the end of the workshop, you get a chance to kind of give some feedback, whether it might be helpful to think about a workshop on exam stress for neurodivergent children in the future. Okay, so confidentiality and personal information. So in our workshops, if you've not joined us before, we use a tool called Slido as our main interaction tool. Unfortunately, we're not able to use the Q&A function or to answer raised hands. Now, Slido is anonymous, but other users will be able to see what you have written. So when answering questions on Slido, please don't use any kind of personal or sensitive information about yourself that may identify you or your young person. And by using Slido, you're consenting to your anonymised responses being used in possible service evaluation, research, publications, and promotional material so that we can hopefully make these workshops better for you in the future. Our workshops are also recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so you will get a recording of this shared with you. So just please be aware that kind of anything you say on Slido today might be included in a publicly accessible recording, although obviously it's anonymous, so they won't be able to know that you've said it. So joining Slido is simple. You can scan the QR code on the left-hand side of the screen using a phone or other device, or you can head to slido.com and type in the code on the screen. My voice keeps cracking, which isn't going to be helpful throughout this workshop. The number is 3415322. Now, it's a very small group of us today, so I really actively encourage you to join Slido if you can, just so we can make the workshops feel a little bit more interactive and get a sense of your experiences as well. So the first question we're wondering about on Slido is, how would you rate your current knowledge of exam stress? Just make sure that Slido is working. Perfect, it looks like it is. We're getting some responses come through now. So we've got some kind of in the middle. So 1 would be kind of, I know nothing about exam stress, and 10 would be, I know absolutely everything there is to know about exam stress. Great, so I can see more people are joining that. That's fab. So it seems like we're kind of around that midpoint at the moment in terms of our knowledge of exam stress. Great. Okay, and the next question is really similar but slightly different. How confident do you feel with understanding and supporting your child with managing exam stress. So really similar, but just thinking about how confident you feel with that. Okay, so the confidence is a little bit lower, which we tend to see. We've also got a few kind of higher up, feeling like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Great, thank you everyone for sharing. Okay, so as we said, we're going to get started now into the content for the workshop on supporting your young person with managing exam stress. Okay, oh, I'm jumping ahead. So, a bit of an outline for what we're going to have a look at today. We're going to think about what is stress. We're going to think a little bit more about the stress response. And then we're going to move on to thinking about strategies. So, how do we manage stress? We're going to include some top tips for exam days, think a little bit about rewards and motivation, and also think about parent top tips. Now, we hope that today will kind of help you to feel a little bit less stuck or a little bit less overwhelmed if you are feeling that way with supporting your young person in managing that exam stress. We know that the exam season can just feel really, really consuming and can be quite a stressful and hectic time in our lives. So hopefully today can kind of give you some ideas on how you might support your young person to develop some effective life skills and to develop their potential. Okay, another Slido question here. So what do you notice in yourself when you hear the word test or exam? Anxiety. Yeah. Dread, worry. Yeah, absolutely. I think dread is the word that came into my mind when I think about an exam. We start to think about all the things that might go wrong with it, or am I going to get this right? Sleepless, yeah. Can spend all night kind of worrying about these things, can't we? Stress and anxiousness and anxiety. And I suppose these are kind of the responses that we notice in ourselves as adults when we hear the word test or exams. So I wonder kind of what you might notice in your young person if you mention the word test or exam. Still dream about it now, years later. Yeah, so it's almost haunting us into our adulthood. Absolutely. Let's see, one more person typing. Panic, not able to think clearly. Absolutely. That thinking part of our brain just kind of goes offline, doesn't it, when we're feeling really stressed or overwhelmed in response to that exam. Great. Thank you, everybody. So, we wanted to start off by thinking with you a little bit about what stress is. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, I know what stress is because we all experience lots of stress throughout our lives, but it's helpful for us to kind of have an understanding of what actually is going on for us when we're feeling stressed. So, in kind of the dictionary definition of stress, it's defined as mental strain resulting from demanding circumstances. So it's about kind of situations that we might be in that are leading us to feel overwhelmed and feel that mental strain. And we know that stress has physical and emotional impacts on the body and the brain as well. And it has really physical responses. You know, we have that adrenaline pumping through our bodies when we're feeling stressed. And we might notice physical symptoms of that. You know, our heart's racing. We might feel sweaty. We might feel really hot, for example. Now, often we experience stress when there's a felt discrepancy between demands and resources. So, when it feels like there's lots and lots of demand going on, and we just don't have enough resource to manage that. And I think exam season is a real example of that, isn't it? When we've got so much information that our young people need to hold in their mind, but obviously we're human and we can only remember so much information. So that can feel really, really stressful and overwhelming. Now, kind of unlike anxiety, stress is very much tied to specific demands and it often kind of resolves itself after that demand. It's kind of a reaction to pressure that's going on in our environment. But similar to anxiety, we might feel really, really overwhelmed at that time. We might experience confusion. We might feel less able to think clearly. Someone mentioned that in the Slido, didn't they? That they hear that word exam and they just can't think clearly. And we might notice that we get thoughts like, I can't do this, or this is just too much. So I suppose it overlaps with anxiety, but it's different in that it's focused around a particular stressor and it's often resolved in the absence of that stressor. And I wonder if this kind of fits with your own experience of stress. And I wonder if you can kind of reflect on how often stress is coming up for you and how much you think stress is coming up for your young person at the moment. Okay. So, as we've said, stress is very common and very normal. It's bound to come up every so often, and it often depends on our context. So, what's going on for us at the time? So, as a parent, it might be if you have lots of stressful situations going on at work, you're going to feel more stressed. And for our younger people, it might be related to those school demands and also what's going on in their personal lives around school. But we need stress in our lives. It's a natural response to challenging situations, and a certain amount of stress is actually good for us. So it's not always a bad thing. Some level of stress is actually healthy. So when we experience stress and we're able to find ways of managing this, it's going to support us to build resilience and also to give our young people life skills. And some amount of stress is also going to have positive functions. So, for example, that adrenaline in our bodies can actually give us a bit more focus, give us a bit more energy, and give us motivation to strive. Where without that, we might not actually get anywhere. And say, in the context of exams, if we didn't have that little bit of stress behind us, maybe our young person wouldn't be revising at all because there wouldn't be any motivation there to get this right and to put that effort into it. So, when it comes to exams, the majority of people who sit in that exam hall are going to feel some level of stress or some level of worry at some point, whether that's getting there and they're experiencing that in the build up, or whether it's on the day, or both. But I suppose it can be really, really helpful to remind our young people that experiencing this is normal and it's okay. It doesn't mean you're going mad. It doesn't mean something bad is going to happen. It's just showing that actually this is something that's really important to you. And this is something that you are working hard and want to get right. So, stress is really common. And although it can be a really unpleasant and uncomfortable thing to experience, it can also be quite healthy. And we can absolutely encourage our young people to use it to their advantage. Now, as we've said, the stress response can impact on us physically. So, the stress response leads to the release of adrenaline in our bodies, and this results in the fight, flight, or freeze response. Okay, similar to anxiety. And this stress response has evolved because it's useful to us to use that fight, flight, or freeze in situations where we're not safe or if we're in danger. But we know that if stress is very high or stress is prolonged, that it can start to then impact on us emotionally and physically. And this can become really, really exhausting for our young people. And that is when stress can become a little bit more unhelpful than helpful. So, when stressed, our young person's brain is experiencing exams as a threat, which is kicking in that fight, flight, or freeze response, where they're going to experience a range of different physical responses. And what might that look like in your young person in the context of exams? Well, maybe if they go into that fight mode in response to to exams, you might notice your young person becomes quite angry when you mention revision or exams. Perhaps they might have a dispute with a teacher at school. Maybe they're really, really competitive with their peers around exams and really motivated to want to do better than those around them. Flight mode might look like wanting to run away from exams. It might be avoiding the lesson entirely when they're really worried about that specific exam. And freeze mode might look like exams feeling so stressful that your young person just can't think. When they're in that hole, they freeze up completely and just feel totally overwhelmed. When it comes to revision, it might be kind of staring blankly at the sheet, appearing to zone out, but this can actually be a stress response. Now, of course, these are all natural responses to what's happening in our young person's body, but they can cause problems. When stress is getting too high and we can't focus on anything, then it tips into being unhelpful. The stress might be so intense that just thinking about exams and revision creates a high level of stress that they can't concentrate. Um, it's only when we're experiencing too much or very intense amounts of stress that it's then going to have an impact on health and well-being. So it's really important to keep this in balance. So the task really for us as parents and carers is supporting our young people to recognize stress, being able to sit with some levels of stress, but also being able to notice when it's creeping into that unhelpful stage and when it's feeling too overwhelming and too intense, and it's then going to have an impact on our young people. Now, we just wanted to think a little bit about some of the situations that stress might come up in outside of exams. It comes up sort of in all different areas of our lives, but nerves and stress often come up when we're entering a competition or when we're doing something that's really important to us. So, for example, we might feel stressed in athletics or competitions, or our young people might be stressed when they're gaming. And that's because they all involve wanting to do well, and that can cause an element of stress. So, a bit like exams, it's that wanting to do well often is creating some of that stress. And it's helpful to sort of support our young person to make that connection so that stress is coming up for us when a task is important to us. It's signposting us to what we value and what is important in our lives. So reminding our young person that they're not alone and you'll be supporting them along the way. But actually noticing that stress and managing it is a skill for life that kind of they're developing at this time. So how do you know you or your young person are stressed? So there's kind of typical responses to stress that we might expect people to experience, but everyone is unique and everyone's going to experience that stress slightly differently. So I'm wondering if you can just take a moment to think about, how do I experience stress and how does my young person experience stress? And we've got some prompts here. Do you have any physical signs? So for me, I tend to get a bit hot. I tend to get a bit sweaty when I'm stressed. Do you have any negative thoughts come up for you? Do you do things differently? Does it show itself in other emotions? So maybe you might be really angry at the time, or maybe you might just feel kind of emotionally shut off. And how would other people know that you're stressed? So I wonder, what is a telltale sign in your household that your young person is feeling stressed? And we've got a Slido here if you're able to share some ideas around what you notice in your young person when they are stressed. Withdrawn, irritability, yeah. So maybe when exams are mentioned, maybe we notice a bit of that irritability. Argumentative. Okay, so maybe that fight mode you're noticing in your young person, angry outbursts, not sleeping, inflexible, moody, arguing over little things. Yeah, so those little things that are going on because we've not got that resource for the demand that's being placed on the young person. Those little things just feel too much and it's tipping us over the edge. Rudeness, yeah. So sometimes our young people might say things that feel really rude because they're feeling stressed. Ungrateful. Yeah, and I suppose it's remembering that sometimes these behaviors can feel really really difficult to manage. It's holding in mind that context of that stress and what's going on in their bodies to help us to understand what is going on um, for our young people. One more person typing. Oh no, it's gone. Okay, so we'll move on there. Now, we wanted to kind of look through a bit of a cycle of stress. So, when we're experiencing stress, we can often kind of get a bit stuck. The things that our bodies naturally are doing for our young people in response to stress can actually sometimes keep that stress cycle going. And often, when we're stressed or our young people are stressed, their heads are going to go to that worst case scenario. So, when thinking about exams, how many times have you kind of heard your young person say, I'm going to fail everything? It's going to be awful. So, jumping straight to that worst case scenario. So just looking through the cycle on here, it's generally going to be that stress response is happening in our bodies and we start to have those unhelpful thoughts. So it might be fearing the worst. I'm not going to manage my exams. I'm going to fail everything. And it might be a really negative perception of themselves. I can't cope with this. This is too much for me. It's not manageable. I can't do it. And then as we're having those thoughts, we're going to be having those feelings. So our young people might be feeling anxious, quite nervous, on edge. They're panicky. They're full of dread. This isn't a nice feeling. And they'll be having those physical sensations in their bodies. So maybe they're hyperventilating. Maybe they're really tense and maybe they're shaky. Maybe they've got that increased heart rate. Maybe they're sweating. And so what do? Well, they're going to do behaviors that are going to try to get rid of some of those anxious and uncomfortable feelings and to try and get rid of some of those thoughts. So it might be that they avoid revision. It might be they study constantly. It might be that they seek constant reassurance. So it's important to remember that we can kind of go one of two ways when it comes to behaviors. It might be that our young person studies constantly. They plan in so much revision that then the revision doesn't seem to stick, or they're overworked, they're so burnt out from the amount of work they're doing because they're so worried about getting it right and wanting to learn everything. Or it might be the opposite. It might be kind of complete avoidance of anything that brings up these uncomfortable feelings for them, or a lack of motivation to do any of that revision or go to that exam. And I think it's worth saying as well that as parents or carers, you will absolutely have your own cycle in response to your young person's exam stress that you're experiencing. You might notice that stress almost feels a bit contagious sometimes, that maybe you're feeling a bit nervous and on edge for your young person. It might be that if your young person is feeling really worried and they're seeking that reassurance, that you as parents and carers will feel really pulled into wanting to give that reassurance. It might be if you notice your young person is avoiding revision, that might bring up feelings of frustration in you because you really want your young person to do well. So I guess it's thinking about what might be your young person's cycle around exam stress. What might be keeping that stress going for them? And also thinking about how that might be having an impact on yourselves. But once we kind of think about how we might get stuck in this cycle, we can then start thinking about how we can break this cycle and how we can exit out of this kind of unhelpful way of thinking. And in doing that, we might think about how do we pay less attention to some of those thoughts that are coming up? How can we refocus our minds onto something that's a bit more helpful? We might think about techniques to manage that anxiety and the physical sensations that are going on in our bodies and techniques that enable us to calm down some of those feelings. And we also might think about how we can change what we're doing. Maybe for a young person, it might be creating a bit more balance without overworking if they're studying constantly. Or if they're avoiding that revision, it's going to be about finding ways to gradually approach revision and support with increasing their motivation around their exams. We're going to discuss some of these ideas uh, shortly. So, as I said, we're now going to move on to thinking about some of the strategies and ways that we can manage exam related stress. And just a reminder that kind of some of these will work for you and your young person, some of them you won't find as helpful. So it's about thinking about your young person and what they need and what's helpful to them, and creating a bit of a toolbox um, for what works for you and trying different things out. So hopefully today gives you a few ideas. We're going to think about getting the basics right. We're going to think about informal relaxation, more formal relaxation, motivation and learning, and also some tips for the day. And we wanted to start off with a little video clip here just to break up you having to listen to me talk at you for a long time. Hopefully the sound works okay. Beth, if you could give me a thumb to let me
Sure.
know. Thank you.
Exams are stressful, but stress doesn't have to take over your life. If we understand the science of how it works, we can make it work for us. When faced with a potentially stressful situation, angry parents, driving tests, or, yes, exams, the danger sensor in our brains, the amygdala, is activated. This alerts the nearby hypothalamus, sending a long-range message via the pituitary gland to the adrenal glands, which secrete the hormones adrenaline and cortisol into our body. Adrenaline increases our blood flow, speeding up our reflexes and sharpening our senses, and cortisol releases glucose, giving our body vital extra energy. This response, known as fight or flight, is our body's way of preparing us to tackle big challenges. But when stress levels get too intense, they can trigger negative symptoms, like difficulty focusing, tension headaches, nausea, and disturbed sleep. The good news is, scientists are working hard to figure out how we can keep our stress response balanced and healthy. Some cultures have used slow breathing to aid relaxation for centuries, and now scientists think they know why. Inhale, now exhale slowly. When we slowly exhale, the signals that control our heart rate are altered, making our heart beat more slowly, and a reduced heart rate helps us relax. Another trick is exercise. When we exercise, our bodies release feel-good chemicals that work in the same way as painkillers do, lifting our mood, reducing anxiety, and helping us to sleep. And sleep is especially important before exams because it helps reduce stress even more. Another area that scientists are investigating is socializing. Believe it or not, locking yourself away in your room for weeks on end is not good exam preparation. When revising, we should make some time to hang out with friends and family, as socializing is a scientifically proven relaxation booster. Scientists have been looking at our close cousins, chimpanzees, for evidence. When they tested chimps' urine, they found that levels of stress hormones were much lower when they'd been spending time with their chimp friends than when they'd been alone. And it seems the same is true for us. So, as your exams get closer, remember, a little bit of stress is no bad thing. Just follow our simple tips and you can take control, getting the right balance that works for you.
Okay, and I think that's a really nice little clip, and it might be something that actually you might want to share with your young person to help kind of get that message across of what's going on in their bodies and help them to kind of normalize and understand what they're experiencing. Okay. So, getting the basics right, it's really important to check in with our young people that they are getting these basics right. So, when addressing stress, we really need to go back to these basics because in order to keep balance and to keep going when we're facing stressful situations, if we don't have these, then the stress that we're facing is going to be more difficult for us to manage because our resources are going to be even lower and we're not going to be able to manage those demands. So thinking about eating, we know nutrition is really important for our brains and our bodies. It helps to give us energy, it helps with focus, and encouraging our young people to have, a good breakfast ahead of their exams or ahead of days that they're doing lots and lots of revision, encouraging that healthy food, carbs, regular meals, so they've got that energy. Also encouraging our young people to keep active. As it said in the video clip, when we do exercise, our body is releasing those feel-good chemicals which lift mood, reduce anxiety, and aid sleep. We need to do something that's getting that pulse rate going above 100 to 120. And you can get really creative with this. It might be dancing vigorously. It might be kind of doing a bit of Zumba together. It might be going outside and kicking a ball around. It might be going for a brisk walk or a run together. So really encouraging our young people to do things that are keeping them active rather than just spending all of their time sat at that desk doing too much revision. You can also find kind of a desk-based activity if our young person is really, really tied to that desk. So it might be if they are doing those prolonged revision sessions that actually they kind of do every 30 minutes, they might start punching their arms around or moving around or just getting up and having a little dance around their room as well. The body gets grumpy when it's not moving for a long time. Connecting with others as well, so socializing. This is a scientifically proven relaxation booster. Our stress hormones are lower when we are around others, and that's animals or people. So maybe if you've got a teen who isn't overly social, it might be spending some time with a cat or spending some time with the dog, or being in nature with others around animals as well. And sleep as well. We're going to think a little bit more about that on the next slide. Now, sleep is really, really important, and getting into a sleep routine before exams start is really helpful. Now, I know this can be a tricky one because most of us know, right, don't we, that we need to get that sleep. We know it's important for exams. But we also know that stress makes it difficult to sleep, and stress often leads to a lack of sleep, which then in turn causes more stress because we know how important sleep is in preparation for our exams. Now, sleep is important, and we want to do our best to create room to get the best sleep possible. But remembering that we don't have complete control over this is really important, okay? So holding in mind, if there's 1 or 2 nights that our young person doesn't have a very good night's sleep, it doesn't mean that it's all going to fall apart. Most people can then get that back on track and function enough. It's about doing our best around sleep and trying to encourage that sleep routine where we can. So here are some things that we can kind of do, which can help to give some control over and increase the chances of having a better night's sleep. So marking out our time for sleep can be really, really important. So kind of saying this is the time that I'm going to bed and this is the time that I'm using for sleep, not kind of laying in bed scrolling on that phone. This is the sleep time. As well, kind of using relaxation exercises to aid sleep can be helpful. Kind of looking at progressive muscle relaxation is quite a nice one, which involves tensing of the muscles from head to toe whilst lying in bed. Also, not putting revision immediately before sleep because we know that could potentially bring up that stress response for our young persons. If they go straight from revising to trying to fall asleep, their bodies are very alert and full of adrenaline and cortisol. So it's going to be really, really difficult for them to fall asleep at that time. Can be helpful to have a bit of a wind down before bed, maybe the hour before we start to have a bath, or I know lavender is a nice scent that helps people to wind down before bed. And it can also be kind of helpful to note down any difficulties that they're experiencing to refocus their mind away from those exams, kind of putting those worries and anxieties down before going to sleep. We've included a couple of workshop slides here with more information on supporting sleep if you're interested in watching. We've got one from our mental health series called Supporting Your Child with Sleep. And we've also got one for neurodivergent children and young people on understanding sleep difficulties with some more guidance. Okay, what ideas pop in your mind that you can do to get the basics right? So how can we support our young people to get these basics? Routine. Yeah, routine can be really, really helpful for young people to know what to expect as well and have that predictability and safety. Um, Set times to eat and break. Yeah, absolutely. So if you notice your young person has been revising for that really long time and maybe they're slipping into that behavior where they're wanting to do too much revision, you can kind of remind them and prompt them to have those breaks. Consistency, rewards. Yeah, we're going to think more about rewards and motivations as well. Really important. Checking in. Yeah, seeing where they are emotionally and making sure that they are getting those basics right to make sure that they're kind of able to have that resource to manage the demands placed on them. Okay, and we wanted to just share another little clip here with you. Which is a video of young people in Suffolk sharing some things that they like to do to help them manage with feelings of distress. And it might be that you want to be curious with your young person to think about what helps them manage stress.
When I feel down or stressed, I like to play guitar to escape from reality.
When I feel down or stressed, I play sport and cook to relieve it all.
When I feel down or stressed, I like to spend time with my family, watch a movie or do something. It helps forget about everything.
When I feel down or stressed, I take time for myself by pampering myself and doing face masks.
When I feel down or stressed, I like to listen to music to help me relax and ease all of the stress I've been feeling lately.
When I feel down or stressed, I like to read because it's something very familiar to me because I've done it since I was young.
When I feel down or stressed, I like to surround myself in nature, so I like to go on a dog walk.
I think that's really lovely to hear from young people what they enjoy and noticing that a lot of those kind of align with some of those basics. So cooking and connecting with people around them seems really important to some of these young people. And I encourage you to kind of have a conversation with your young person and be curious. What is it that they might like to do and what could you plan into their schedule to help kind of de-stress? Okay. Finding balance. So have you ever heard your young person who's overworking kind of say something like, "But I don't have time to do nice things or relax. I'm too busy. I need to be revising at the moment." And this is often what we hear young people say. It's really important to make the time for relaxation because it's going to give our young people the opportunity to have better outcomes, really, and feel not overwhelmed by that stress and not let it get to that unhealthy level. So there'll be times that the balance isn't quite even. So maybe approaching those summer exams, it's going to feel like all stress and no relaxation. And it's okay that sometimes periods are going to feel a little bit out of balance, but it's about making sure that they're roughly balanced. Our young people aren't doing one or the other. So kind of this can feel difficult to do, but it might actually just be planning in a small amount of time to make sure that our young people are doing something different. It might be 30 minutes in the evening. They're going to do their relaxing activity, but encouraging that balance is a really, really healthy model for life. And if we don't kind of plan this, then young people often end up kind of not having that relaxation time, or when they are relaxing, they're kind of thinking that I should be revising, I should be doing this and feeling guilty. So they're not truly relaxing. Or when they're working, they're feeling unmotivated, they're feeling tired and burnt out from doing too much. So planning can really help to use the time effectively and ensure that our young people are having time where they are relaxing. Now, I'm going to discuss the concept of an automatic pilot. This is something we all experience and learning about it is an important skill that we have. So, have you ever found yourself kind of eating a meal and you can't remember what you've eaten, or maybe you walk the dog or you walk to school and you can't remember? A common one for me is I'll just appear somewhere and I don't know how I got there, or I might go to do something and I've noticed that I've already done it. Um, and it's like our brains are kind of on autopilot. They're thinking about something else while we're doing a familiar task. And this is great because our brain doesn't really expend much energy when we're doing that. And it's really helpful some of the time when we're juggling busy lives. So maybe we might be planning our day out whilst we're having a shower, for example. It can also be a problem. Our minds can spend too much of the day focusing on kind of worried or stressful thoughts without us really realizing it. And we're not engaging fully in the main task we might be trying to do. So maybe we were taking that dog walk because that was something we do to help us relax. But instead, we spent that time worrying about something else. Um, Another example might be kind of the development of a bit of a social media use habit. We can automatically kind of go to using our social media. You might notice that in your young person, where they might kind of automatically just go to that social media and be scrolling um, there. So our brains are very, very used to darting about and thinking of lots and lots of things at a time, and our thoughts and habits can sometimes seem to have free rein. But this is not a great recipe for managing stress. So we're going to do an exercise now, which helps us when we're kind of in this auto mode. And yeah, so this is an activity you could encourage your young person to do. So if we can spend the next kind of minute or so thinking about all the circles that you can see in your environment, I encourage you to get up, move around the room you're in, and try and find as many different circles as you can. And doing this in a really slow and intentional way. If you notice your thoughts are not connected to the activity you're doing, that's fine, it happens. But bringing back the focus of your mind and what's going on to finding all the circles in your environment. I don't know what you can see in yours, Beth.
There are so many circles. Yeah, things I hadn't even noticed in the room before.
Yeah, I can't see many circles, which is making mine quite difficult.
Yeah, they're everywhere, even where I wouldn't expect to see them actually.
Great. So that's kind of something that you can use with your young person, and that's going to really encourage them to kind of come back to that present moment. Okay. So what we just did is, I guess, a bit of a mindfulness activity, and it can be considered a formal type of relaxation. It's an activity we can do to encourage our brains to stay in the present moment and focus on what is around us here and now. And we can notice when our minds are wandering elsewhere, and we can choose whether to follow our wandering mind or we can choose to focus on the present moment. And this can kind of help us get out of that automatic pilot mode that we might notice our young person fall into. And research tells us that learning this kind of mindfulness skill is really, really helpful for stress management. You know, it's helpful to notice thoughts and feelings we have, but we don't need to get stuck with them, and we can choose to refocus on something else. And I guess the top tip around this is it's not going to be helpful to get cross when thoughts come in that are kind of distracting us from this, but instead allowing them to come and go, noticing those thoughts and refocusing on what we want to focus on. And there's a range of apps out there that might help. Some teach mindfulness exercises, which can be helpful for training the brain. And another app that I've heard of is a productivity app. And if you turn to social media during your study or work hours, then it sends you a motivational message to help you stay on task. And this is going to be a really helpful way of noticing that autopilot. And like I said, there's lots of ways we can do mindfulness, lots of different apps. And also kind of breathing activities can be helpful. And you can practice these mindfulness activities wherever you are. Just training our young person's brain to focus on one thing at a time can be really helpful. So it can be used really flexibly. And now I'm going to hand over to Beth.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.
So starting with a question, what motivates you or your child to sit an exam even when it's stressful? So what is the motivation that means you turn up and you get there even though you really don't want necessarily to go through that experience, the stress? So the future choices, so wanting to be able to have choices and maybe depending on your performance, increase the range of choices. I'm thinking about my driving test, which I failed drastically in the first one. And yeah, what motivated me there was I wanted to be able to drive and open up my world. Yep, so job and money. Yeah, fear of failure. How awful would you feel if you didn't go to that exam or you just didn't sit the exam? Yeah, the sense that it will be done. It's an achievement, just having gone through it and done it. So there's lots of different motivators, aren't there, for any of us? And it's such a key part of us doing things that require um, energy and drive when we don't even really feel like doing them. So are you okay to move to the next slide? Oh, wanting to pass, absolutely. So we all need motivation. I mean, that helps us get things done, and often sometimes even enjoy doing them. So getting paid for a job helps you do the job, turn up for work earlier in the morning. You're not always doing it just because of that intrinsic motivation and desire to be working. Friends coming over might motivate you to tidy up. I know if anyone's popping round, there's never any period of time where things more quickly get picked off the floor and shoved in cupboards than when I've got guests. So few people like tests and exams. So motivators can really help us engage in those things that we find hard to get on with. So if you think about your young person's long-term goals and motivations, it might be just finishing school, just having it done. I know that's definitely my daughter's in year 11 at the moment, and she just wants school out of her life. For another young person, it might be the career they want. It might be wanting to be able to do something in particular in the future, being able to go on to go to college or do the A levels they're looking for, or think about even ahead of that, young people might already have ideas about what they want to study, what job they want to do, what university they might want to go. Also, proving yourself can again be another long-term goal and motivation, kind of feeling the sense of achievement from putting that hard work in and getting those grades to show for it. So those longer term goals can help with motivation. If you imagine, and it's really difficult if your child doesn't have a huge amount of motivation for those longer term goals, because it makes it really hard to put that effort into the revision that's required, which can then increase stress because there's anxiety about not being able to have the information that you need when you go into that exam. I guess not only are those visions of the future and what you're wanting potential motivators, but they're also potential stressors, aren't they? Because what we were talking about earlier with those negative thoughts, if you start panicking, if I don't do well in this exam, I'm not going to be able to go to university, I'm not going to be able to do a job that and my whole life is going to turn into a disaster, then it can end up spiraling. But it's really important to remember that when we're losing motivation, we might actually need some support with shorter term rewards and motivators. And I'm sure that you'll have been doing some of this at home already with thinking about, when your child gets back from their exams. So a lot of young people are doing GCSEs this week, lots of young people are doing SATs. You might be thinking about, what special dinner you're going to cook or what treat you might have in store for your child based on what they really like. So it's really difficult because a lot of this is written about when your young person's got exams quite far in the future. But I'm really aware that most people on this call, their child is having exams now. So thinking yourself about what is how do exams link with your child's goals and values? So if achievement is really important for them, if their future career is really important for them, then you can think about those motivators. And again, if actually those goals and values are completely different, they're not so bothered about achievement and they're not so worried about what they're going to do next, then it's thinking possibly about other motivators that will help encourage them to kind of persist despite those feelings of stress. Um, Again, just thinking about small rewards for each step rather than one big reward for finishing everything and doing well. And it's a long way away, results day, if your child is doing A level or GCSEs at the moment, or even SATs. You have to wait quite a long time to see the outcome. So just thinking about those little things, and you'll know this for yourself. If you've got a hard day at work or you've had a really hard day at home, you might think, right, tonight I'm going to sit down with my cup of tea or my glass of wine and I'm going to have that chocolate. I'm going to watch my favorite program. And that can sometimes help you get through some of those difficulties of the day. So maybe help your young person think about what are the things that are restorative, what are the things that feel like a reward, and how can we build that into your daily routine so that it feels like you're having that experience of restoration and reward, and just really not so much the focus on that long-term outcome, just thinking about everything in those gradual steps, I think is also really valuable. So you've done your maths exam today. You're not quite sure how well it went, but you feel like you answered some good questions. That's brilliant. Let's think about the next step. Let's help you think about what can help you shift to what's happening next. So this is really something which is helpful for young people, and I'm going to whiz through it because we're so short on time. But really, if we want to prepare our young people for success, we can try and think about how can we make the things that are more difficult for us to do easier to do. So I know what it's like myself, and I'm sure you've had the same situation where you've got to do something quite difficult, like write a report or do some revision, or do some unpleasant task at home. And what you find yourself doing is everything but. So I think when I was a student at uni, my room was always most immaculate during term time because I spent exam time because I spent so much tidying up my space before I actually got down to revision. So it's really important to think about how can we make it easier for our young people to get study to the top of the tower. So we reduce all of those distractions that might be in the way and make it more accessible. So if you imagine in this scenario, the building blocks of your behaviors, the top ones will always be our go-to behaviors. They're the ones we automatically do without really having to think too hard. So if you want study or revision to become a go-to behavior, then you have to think about what's going to get it up to the top of the tower. So if you can think about what things you can do or you can support your child do to make it easier to do revision. Now, this could be different for everyone, but some of these basic things here on this slide deck will make that easier. So if we can set things in place to help stack the tower in favor of what we want to do, e.g., for example, what would help me is finding a set time when not too many other tempting distractions are in the way, would potentially prevent us from ending up with a revision falling to the bottom of the tower. So really the aim is to identify and set up all the little things that will help increase the chances that you'll do that behavioural study. So there's a few things that you can potentially do is support them with having a good working environment without too many interruptions or too cluttered a space, supporting with time management. Some young people are really confident doing this and they don't want their parents to get involved. And I think if your child seems to be doing well in that domain, I think you can allow them to continue with that independence. But you can ask your child, what can I do that will be really helpful to support you and encourage you? What are the sorts of small things potentially, or what are the things that actually I'm doing which are unhelpful? And you might be surprised by what your teen or child volunteers And often as a parent, your own guilt about whether or not you're doing enough revision cards with them can make you think that some of the help you think your child should be having or needs um, is actually what they want, but actually for some young people they would prefer not to do revision cards with you, and so that's okay that you haven't had enough time to support them with that. Um, so often finding out from your child or teen what is it that feels like a reward and how can I help you build that into your routine and your relaxation time. So this is you a bit more of a continuation of this really. So what can you do more explicitly? So you can stack the odds in favor of them being able to do their revision. So really simple things like that positive reinforcement, increasing the amount of encouragement that you're able to give them for those small steps towards those goals. Thinking about being specific when you're praising your young person. So you can say, I'm really proud of how much effort you put into that subject when I know that you really struggle with it. Or I've noticed actually that you took a break, even though you're feeling quite overwhelmed by this subject. And when you were on your break, you went outside and you kind of got into nature, well done. So you're kind of really noticing and paying attention to the things that your teen or child is doing, which are likely to have a benefit, particularly having watched this webinar. And I guess we can get stuck quite often in nagging our young people. And so by doing the positive reinforcement, you're moving away from saying, should you have you done, should you have done, shouldn't you be, which can actually sometimes add to that irritability that you see in your child or teen. And then the natural consequences is a really tricky one because it involves us as parents tolerating the fact that we might not be able to protect our child or teen from the impact of not doing as well as they'd hoped. Quite often, for a lot of young people, just doing well after hard work is a great reward in itself. Um, but failing a test after not revising is often a natural consequence for the not revising, which can actually give that young person the realization that next time they do that exam, they need to put more into potentially revising or do it slightly differently. And so I think bringing your child or teen back to the process of revising, setting, having the exam and getting the results is all part of the learning process. So if it doesn't go so well, you can think about what was it about that exam or what I did in terms of the preparation that didn't work as well, so that next time I can perhaps do something slightly differently. And I think having a 20-year-old now who was probably a bit too relaxed about his exams when he was doing his GCSE and A levels and feels a bit kind of that he underperformed in his grades. Seeing him now studying in higher education, he's putting so much self-motivated effort into all of that work because he's learned the hard way the consequences of perhaps not applying himself as much as he could. He kind of knowingly didn't apply himself. And then again, it's really important to focus on the future and, the positive consequences of getting through that exam period, and just encouraging them with that cheerleader role, really. So things that you can do on the day, we're going to quickly run through now. So we're going to run through self-talk, imagery, breathing, and grounding. And these are all things that are helpful for your young person to practice before. So if they're already in exams, they might be doing some of this already. So let's just have a think about what helpful things have you said to yourself before an exam or stressful event? What do you normally do to which is helpful before going into something. I'm aware that we're at time, so we're going to probably run over by 10 minutes. Okay, so
Okay,
this is,
Beth, I think it's an hour and 15 minutes.
oh, okay. In my diary, it's 1 hour. So that's good. Phew, I can slow down. I was just suddenly thinking, oh my God, I've got 1 minute.
Okay. It's okay.
You've got this, Beth.
You've got this. You can only do your
It will
best.
be over in 15 minutes. So yeah. Yep, exactly. So this kind of sense of this is temporary, and it's transitional. It's not going to stick like this forever. Those kind of positive voices of you can do this, kind of really encouraging yourself and thinking, yeah, I'm going to do my best, and my best isn't good enough. That's just the way it is. So I think these are lovely, lovely reflections, and I think over your years of adulthood, you've probably really developed this skill because you've had the experience of feeling stressed about something. You've done that thing, and then you've got through the other side. And so you can sometimes use those experiences as part of that self-talk. So that gives you the confidence. Yeah, I did this before. I can do it again. So Zoe, if you could go to the next slide. So this is where we think about self-talk. I can relax now. So what we say to ourselves really does matter. And of course, what other people say to us really matters. Um, and it's so common for us to have, we all will have this because unhelpful thoughts are part of life, aren't they? And they're often quite self-critical. So you may find yourself, and your young person may be finding their mind saying unhelpful statements like, I'm going to fail, everyone will do better than me. And there's a lot of that comparison, isn't it? And I know on social media, young people, as soon as they come out of their exam, they're all posting about what the exam was like. And if you found it really hard and everyone's going, oh, that was brilliant, it's really hard, isn't it, to not go down that route of going, oh, I'm the only person who got this wrong. And just, doubting ourselves and feeling we're not very good at something. And all of those statements really have, as Zoe was saying earlier on, do have a negative impact, not just on how we're feeling in our body, but on how we might be approaching what we're going to do next. They can make us feel overwhelmed. They can make us feel like there's no point in trying. They can strip us of our motivation. So one of the things that we do a lot of with young people when we do any work around stress or managing worry and anxiety is actually helping them find some helpful statements, almost like a helpful mantra that they can rehearse and like put on their phone. Or we used to do years ago, people would write their own little cards with these positive statements. And often we do it in groups with young people so that they could come up with ideas for each other too. And then actually support those other young people by saying, remember, you've got this. So there's these statements can be really helpful, like you've just described on the previous slide, in helping us cope with that kind of temporary stress. And there's something about kindness. I always talk about the kind of, one side, on one shoulder, you've got the megaphone of criticism and you're going to mess up. And then on the other side, you've got this tiny whisper of your cheerleader who's like, you're great. You can do this. Even if you don't get it perfect, that's okay. You've made the effort. And I always talk to young people about really trying to kind of tune out the megaphone, which is really difficult, but tune into and listen and pay attention to that little whisper. So the kindness element is so important. And I think as a parent, when you're seeing your child go through this stressful period, if you can just hold on to kindness and the value of your relationship with your child, quite often is more important than feeling like you are confident they've done as much revision as they should have done. So having those kind words and that encouragement from you, but also kind of modeling this. And I know that one of the things I have to work on is this myself, even now, and I'm nearly 50. I have to think about how do I, in front of my children, talk out loud, which shows that it's hard work for me to do this sometimes. Something didn't go very well at work today. I perhaps didn't do that presentation as well as I'd hoped, but I'm sure that everyone else enjoyed it more than I think they did. And actually, what I can learn from this is perhaps I need to prepare a little bit better. So, doing some practicing this yourself and doing more talking out loud when you're doing it, I think really demonstrates to your children or your teens that this self-talk, which is quite negative, is very natural. Naturally going on in these stressful situations where we deeply care about the outcomes, and we have to kind of talk to ourselves to big ourselves up and remind ourselves of the things that sort of we lose perspective on when that negative self-talk is in full megaphone. um, well, I can't even think of the word. So one of the things that, if you think about your child's room, is going to be full of revision post-it notes, maybe. And it's maybe thinking about, can we put some post-it notes up that say, I've got this, I can do this. What's the worst that could happen? I always think of those Dr. Pepper adverts, which are probably a bit outdated now, in terms of, really reminding our children that actually the worst that can happen isn't necessarily going to be as life-changing as they believe. So kindness and compassion, and learning to do that for ourselves as parents, especially during this exam season, because it's really tough when you're trying to manage all of this stress whilst also manage your own life, which will continue to have those stresses in it. So if you do nothing else today, leave this session with trying to tune into that cheerleader voice on your shoulder, and do more of that out loud so that your child or teen gets the opportunity to learn how to do it. Imagery is so important. Quite often when we go into that spiraling zone of panicking about the worst case scenario, and for me, I remember going into an exam and literally my brain buzzing and going blank and not being able to even read and take the words in. I was so stressed. And whenever I think about an exam, I always think about that moment and how awful it felt. And so if I think about going to an exam, that would be my imagery, rather than all the other exams that actually I did okay in. So there's something about how can we use imagery, or how can we support our child or teen to use imagery as a way to fast track information to our brain, to help soothe our nervous system, to help us de-stress. So we know famous athletes and musicians will use visualization before competing. And this is a really successful technique in helping with that belief that they've got this. If you watch any of those kind of sporting events, you can see that sports person doing that mindful moment, and probably they're imagining success rather than failure. So you can talk to your child or teen about an image, what an image of success might look like. And it might be just looking like it's the summer holidays and I'm not having to worry about exams anymore. It might be them imagining doing A levels at college, or it might be more concrete, like just imagining. A lot of young people I talk to actually, being in a safe place in their bedroom, and chilling out, or being with a friend, or being outside in nature, that if they visualize that, then it can really help soothe their nervous system. So finding out a bit more from your child or teen, what is an image that actually helps them feel calmer, and then getting them to paint the picture of it to you quite clearly. Then you can perhaps help them say, oh, when you're really, really stressing, why don't you try to move to imagining that picture in your mind, particularly helpful at bedtime. So we're just going to do a quick bit of breathing here. We know that breathing is so, so important. And I've worked in schools before and seen all of the students lining up in their GCSEs, and a quite big secondary school, literally hundreds of young people lining up with their pencil cases, waiting to go in the exam hall. Everybody having different responses to stress and anxiety. Some people really quiet and pale, some people joking around and being silly, some people just kind of chatting earnestly to their friends, some trying to just stay calm. And what any young person or any person can do is think about their breathing, because in all probability their breathing is going to be happening much more quickly when they're feeling stressed, whether that's before they go into the exam hall, maybe before they go to sleep at night, and maybe when they sit in front of that paper. So helping your child or teen to learn about breathing is so important. So box breathing is a useful way of doing it. So if you imagine a square and you think about holding your breathing, so we'll do it quickly now. So we're going to hold for 4 seconds. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Then hold for 4 seconds, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. And one of the things that we know about is counting and doing that breathing massively helps slow the stress response down and helps a young person get that feeling of losing control. And what we know is about the way that carbon dioxide and oxygen, the imbalance, because normally, and I always say to young people, you know, when we're stressed, our breathing changes as if we're going to fight or flight. So if the thing you're going to have to do is sit exceptionally still and do an exam, it's like, you know, the worst combination, isn't it? So the breathing is the one thing you can do to physically tell your body, I'm okay, I've got this. So helping your child or teen with that. And there are different types of breath. So if you've got younger children, there's some examples on this slide, including finger breathing, thinking about belly breathing with the balloon. And again, these are really good habits. So for people on the call with younger children, it's really nice to teach them this and build it into bedtime routines so that it becomes a habit, and then it makes it easier to use when you're in that stressful situation. So grounding, this is really, really helpful. So you'll know when you've experienced stress that the experience in your body of you know, your heart rate increasing, your breathing changing, feeling tingly, all those different physical sensations, and the thoughts swirling around your mind mean you become very internally focused. This grounding exercise is really, really good at helping you reconnect with the world around you. And again, it's something you can do without others necessarily knowing you're doing it. And it is something a young person could do at the beginning of an exam. So the idea is that you're going to look for 5 things you can see. So if I was doing it right now, I'd be thinking 5 things I can see. You can do it along with me. And it's about really take a bit like with the circles exercise, you're trying to take the time. I can see a blind, I can see a silver door handle, I can see my blue water bottle, I can see my lanyard, I can see a lip balm, and then moving on to 4 things you can feel. So this is a really great one, because what I always say when I'm helping young people do this is feel your feet on the ground, then pay attention to your toes inside your shoes or your sock or your tights, and put some pressure on that so that you're kind of feeling literally really grounded. Feel your bum on the seat of your chair. Feel your back on the seat of your chair. Feel the sensation of your clothes and your body. These are all things that we're ignoring because we're so, you know, caught up with everything else that we're noticing, particularly if we're stressed in that moment, our internal body cues. Then you can move to 3 things you can hear, and then you might tune in, and it's amazing what you're just screening out all the time. So I can hear my laptop, I can hear the road traffic noise, and if I had a window open, I might be able to hear some bird sound. 2 things you can smell, and for young people who feel like they can't really smell anything, then you can say, well, look, you know, this isn't supposed to be a stressful exercise. If you can't smell anything, particularly the 2 things, then imagine a smell that you love. And then 1 thing you can taste. And the same again, if it feels like, oh, I just don't have a proper taste in my mouth, then it's imagining something that tastes good. And this can just be something, again, that if you're able to practice, or your teen or child is able to practice in low stress situations, it's a good thing, again, to practice in the evenings at bedtime. If you've got younger children, again, get them into the habit of practicing this. Then when they're in the more stressful situation, it will be much easier to use. And I think we've got a video clip in the resource deck. Right, got a couple of minutes. So support. So when we're thinking about support for our children, Um, it's about, you know, really acknowledging that asking for help is something that's a really important skill. Um, so let's think with your child or teen, who are the people that can help you with extra support in your life? It could be family, it could be friends and family friends. There might be particular teachers or pastoral staff at school who know you well, know your learning style. I've just had to email school about my daughter because I know they know and I know some of her struggles with the unstructured element of the rest of the day outside of exams, and I've had to ask them if they can think a bit creatively about how to support her with that, because that's going to create a problem, and she probably won't end up going to prom if we're not careful. So there's things that you know, hopefully you can ask for support from school. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for support. My daughter actually asked me, please, can you email the head of year because I need some help with this, which is quite unlike her. And I thought the head of year is never going to give any help with that. And I did email them, and they have actually been really helpful. So don't be afraid to ask for things, even if they seem like that you might not get the response you want. And also just having those conversations about what works for them, so that, and it might be something that's completely different from what worked for you. We also have Kooth, which is an online wellbeing support. It's a counselling service, text-based, that all young people in Suffolk can access for free. And Young Minds is a national charity which have a chat and text service. So just making sure that your young person or teen knows that there's those support areas around there that they can just access largely at any time of the day, and they don't necessarily need your involvement is really helpful. And then really with your parents, you know, asking your child how or teen what you can best do to support them. You know, for my son, when he was doing his SATs a bit younger, he just said, Mom, when I come in, I don't want you to ask me any questions about my day. I just want to be able to go up to my bedroom and have a snack and an hour of going on Minecraft. That is the thing that you can best do to support me during this time. And I was like, okay. And I feel a real pressure to have that conversation. How did it go? And actually being given permission to not have that conversation without feeling like I'm somehow failing as a parent was really helpful. Same with my daughter. I think I've asked her how I can best support her, and she just said, "Don't hassle me, and you know, make sure there's all my favorite snacks in." And actually I can do that, and it kind of releases me from that pressure to feel like I should be doing what some other parents I see might be doing that works really well for their child, which is really supporting them with their revision timetable or doing flashcards with them. So every child is different, and having that conversation, and being curious about that's really important. Think about being your child's or teen's coach rather than their manager, and we talk about that more in another workshop. We've got a link to there. So you're coaching them, you're not telling them necessarily what they need to do, and you're in that more supportive role, which allows for them to do some of that learning for themselves, even if the consequences are not going to be necessarily easy for them. Think about your own stresses and your own expectations and those pressures that might add to you as a parent, but also to them as a young person. You know, focus on the process and not the outcome. You know, we get so caught up on goals and destinations, and really the journey, you know, if there's one thing we can teach our children about life is like how the journey is a really important part. So how can they make this process not feel so much of an ordeal? And maybe that's better than having a grade difference. And I feel like I've had to privilege my relationship with my children at times over the grade they're going to get, because I feel sometimes as a parent that if I go into a certain zone, my relationship with my teen is going to really degenerate. And actually, I don't think the outcome's going to be any better for them, because I don't think that the pressure that I might be putting on them is actually going to result in them doing revising any more or differently. Again, just really remembering that your child may have different values to you than at this point in time, and holding in mind that those values may change over time, and they may change over time because of the outcomes of their results based on the decisions that they've made now. And again, just remembering you're the parent who will be there to support them. And I know that often you can feel like, that you're the parent who may pay the price if things don't go so well. But really, if we go back to process, then rather than outcome, then maybe it doesn't need to feel so much like that. Again, negotiating balance for some young people, you may have to really remind them and put those boundaries in, because they may find it really hard to manage those boundaries without that support. And I guess doing what you can to enable a calm environment, which undoubtedly can be really difficult in busy households. But again, it's going back to doing the best you can with what you've got, and trying not to compare yourself and what's happening in your home to what might be seen to be happening in other people's homes through social media, or the conversations that you might have with other families. We've got a very brief summary, just really to the take-home points. It is normal to feel exam stress. I think 96% of students feel exam stress. If we can kind of change the narrative to around the journey and the process and what you can learn through this experience, rather than focusing on the outcome, that can be really helpful. There are lots of skills that can be used and learned during this time, which will actually be really helpful for managing stress throughout our lives. How can we create environments and language that prepare our children for success? And don't be afraid to seek support in the systems around you as a parent, or enable your child or teen to do the same. So yeah, there's a nice quote: you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So that is what this is. This is an amazing opportunity to potentially learn to surf. So we've got lots of resources that will come out with the resource pack. I want to make sure there's a podcast that I did with a group of young people about advice on what parents can do to support their child or teen through exam stress, which I'll just make sure we add to this, Zoe. Although I appreciate it's a little bit late in the day because you're already in it, but if you want to listen to something while you're doing the washing up, then that's quite nice, because there was a mixture of young people, some of them saying, I actually really needed my parent to kind of be quite firm with me and support me do a bit more, and others saying, oh no, if my parent had done that, that would have been really hard. So it's quite interesting listening to them and hearing their perspective, and they're all in their early 20s now, and all doing different things. So that's quite a nice resource. And then I think we've also got some other live workshops and recordings that Zoe talked about at the beginning. And then if you're really worried about your young person, you think that the challenges that they're facing during this time are meaning that you think they absolutely need more support, then please use these services to get that support, and also link in with some of the additional resources there.